Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook was born in 1865 in Griva in present-day Latvia, and he died in 1935 in Jerusalem. He's famous for many things, among them, in 1919, he was appointed the first Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi of Jerusalem. You can note that that still is in British Mandate Palestine before the state of Israel was founded. And though he died in 1935, his influence on the contemporary Jewish world is vast and contradictory. Amazing that he is both the founder, the spiritual father of religious Zionism. He's seen to be the spiritual grandfather of that movement. And yet he's also the spiritual father of the critics of nationalist Zionism and religious Zionism. He's also seen to be an ancestor of the neo-mystic revivals that are happening in Judaism as well. And for Rav Kook, I would say these contradictions, he worked with secular Zionists, religious Zionists. He didn't see any separations because he was a mystic. For him, these were not contradictions. He just saw a larger view of the world, perhaps. He was working on a different spiritual plane. Because for a mystic, right, a mystic really of any religion, what that means is that you see the physical reality as in some ways as not the true reality. It's an illusion. And what is the true reality? The true reality is that we are all one. We are all part of one whole and united. And so what might appear to us as contradictions, I'm going to suggest were not contradictions for him. And his teaching specifically on Chuva, on return and repentance, were gathered in a book called Orot HaChuva, the lights of Chuva. And we're going to see the language of light all the way through. I want to share with you, though, a quote for him, from him, that he shared talking about his time living in London. When I lived in London, I would visit the National Gallery, and my favorite pictures were those of Rembrandt. I really think that Rembrandt was a tzaddik, a religious person, a righteous person. Do you know that when I first saw Rembrandt's works, they reminded me of the legend about the creation of light? We are told that when God created light, it was so strong and pellucid that one could see from one end of the world to the other. But God was afraid that the wicked might abuse it. What did God do? God reserved that light for the righteous when the Messiah should come. But now and then there are great ones who are blessed and privileged to see it. And I think that Rembrandt was one of them. And the light in his pictures is the very light that was originally created by God Almighty. We can see here an example of what Rav Kook means by light, something that is created by God, that has spiritual power, but that is accessible to the ones who can see it. And the ones who can see it are not restricted to those who study the Torah and observe all of the commandments, right? A non-Jewish artist, if he opens his eyes to the truth of the world, can also access this light. It is, again, available and accessible to all because it is part of the living reality. In this work, Orot HaTshuva, Rav Kook guides us through his philosophy of what it means to return to God, how to do it. And there's a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, that one of his students saw him studying Orot HaTshuva during the high holiday Chuva season. And his students said to him, "Why are you studying your own book? You wrote it." And his reply was something like, "I received it," but that he considered it to be something that just came through him, a transmission from the divine, and so that he would also want to study it. In his foreword, this is how he introduces how he wanted to represent why he wrote this book. And I'm going to you can follow along on the source sheet. Also, I'm going to try, Amar's also going to help me from My Jewish Learning to put in the quotes I'm using in the chat so that you can stay on the main screen if you choose to. So this is from the foreword of The Lights of Chuva. For a long time now, an inner struggle goes on in me, and I feel prodded by a mighty force to speak about Chuva. And all my thoughts are focused on this theme alone. Chuva holds a primary place in the teachings of the Torah and in life. All the hopes of the individual and of society depend on it. It embodies a divine mitzvah that is, on the one hand, the easiest to carry out, since a stirring of the heart toward Chuva is a valid expression of Chuva. And on the other hand, it is the most difficult to perform, since it has not yet been effectuated fully in the world and in life. So what is Chuva? This impulse to return to the root of the soul. We'll see he talks about it that way. And on the one, he says, it's the most easy and accessible thing possible. There's nothing difficult or heavy about it. It's that impulse, that urge in you that says, oh, what did I just do? Oh, I want to be better. Oh, how do I get closer to the me that is truly and wholly me? How do I get closer to the divine? So it's the most accessible and natural thing in the world. And just even having that impulse is in itself Chuva. And yet, on the other hand, to really engage full Chuva, since Chuva exists in the world, but it's not fully the way that our physical reality is set up. We have all of these barriers to it. We have to actually effort to get to full and whole Chuva. And so he feels this compulsion to share what he has learned about Chuva with us. So in chat, and I'm going to be skipping around in this long masterwork, right, which is fully available in English translation in books, and you can see the whole thing online at Sefaria in its original Hebrew. I'm just going to be reading selections to guide us through different concepts of what Chuva might be. And my plan is to just kind of go for a bit, and then I'll stop for questions if there are any, and then we'll do some more. So if you have questions, feel free to hold on to them, write them down, so that when we're ready for them, you can put them in the chat or raise your virtual hand and the reactions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, so let's dive in for a bit, shall we? Chapter 2, Sudden Chuva and Gradual Chuva. In terms of time, Chuva may be divided into two parts. Sudden Chuva, which in Hebrew is Chuva Pitomit, and Gradual Chuva, Chuva Hadragit. So Chuva can happen in a lot of different ways. It can be like a flash of insight, or it can be this gradual awakening. Sudden Chuva comes about as a result of a certain spiritual flash that enters the soul. At once the person senses, all the evil and the ugliness of sin, and they are converted into a new being. Already they experience inside themselves a complete transformation for the better. This form of tshuva dawns on a person through the grace of some inner spiritual force whose traces point to the depths of the mysterious. Meaning, we don't know why this happens. It's mysterious. And Mara, if you can put this in the chat, that would be great for everyone who's following along. Thank you. There's an example in the Talmud of this happening to a guy who spent his whole life just really kind of as a degenerate, but all of a sudden he has this sudden flash and he realizes truly to the depths of his soul the lack of worth in his own actions. And he feels it so deeply. He cries out, right? And according to the Talmud, in that moment, he actually dies. But because he realizes it before his death, he's accounted a righteous person, right? So sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had this experience of something that you used to like to do that wasn't really good for you. All of a sudden, you're just like, oh, I get it. This is like not working. I don't even want it anymore, right? Usually we still want to do the things that, that weren't good for us, but we're working on it, right? But sometimes it's just like, ugh, no, keep that away from me. I am already different. That's sudden, tshuva pitomit. But there's also a gradual form of tshuva, according to Rav Kook. And gradual tshuva is not a sudden flash of illumination, but rather there's no sudden flash of illumination that dawns upon the person to make them change from the depth of evil to good, but they feel they must mend their ways of life, their will, their pattern of thought. By heeding this impulse, they gradually acquire the ways of integrity. They correct their behavior, they improve their actions, and they condition themselves increasingly to do what is right until they reach the level of purification and repair. And so this process is okay. We're not going to get it all at once, but slowly, we'll get there. The higher expression of tshuva comes about as a result of the flash of illumination of the all good, the divine, the light of the one who abides in all worlds. The universal soul, the spiritual essence, is revealed to us in all its majesty and holiness to the extent that the human heart can absorb it. In truth is in everything, all of existence, whole and good, such that the good and wholeness of ourselves and his expression of our connection to the all, how then can we be torn away from the all, a strange crumb, detached like tiny grains of sand that are of no value? As a result of this perception, which is truly a divinely inspired perception, comes about tshuva from love in the life of the individual and in the life of the collective. There's so much here. We could actually probably spend the whole hour just on this one teaching alone. But the thing that I want to pull from it beyond the idea of the sudden and the gradual tshuva is that basically when you're really in tshuva, according to Rav Kook, you recognize that the world is fundamentally good, that the divine is good and created a world that is good. And so the grounding of the world that we live in is goodness. And all the evil, which does exist, right? Within the self, within the community, within the world, within ever expanding circles, it's true. But it's only true because it's a partial experience of the world. And if you truly could expand your vision, your spiritual vision, to a macro vision, you would know that all of it is enveloped by the good. And knowing that allows the tshuva. Again, it's not from a place of you're bad, you're wrong. We actually don't have original sin in our religion. Rav Kook is telling us we are good. And again, tshuva is a return to the home of being good, to the home where we can return at any moment. And knowing that helps us to do that return. I'm going to flash forward. I know that's a lot, to chapter 7 and share a few more teachings about how we hear the voice of the divine in our tshuva. So on your sheets, this is Roman numeral 3 on the second page, but I did just put it in the chat for anyone who would like to follow along. There are 2 different boxes. So I'm starting at the first timestamp, 9:20 a.m. Through passing thoughts of tshuva, which are called hear hooray tshuva, which just means like wisps of tshuva, not full on realizations like we were talking about in the last teaching, but just like stirrings of tshuva, it's sometimes translated as. A person hears the voice of the divine calling to them through the Torah and through each emotion of their hearts, through the world and its fullness and everything inside it. And the desire for good goes along and strengthens inside the person, and the flesh itself begins to be refined until the light of tshuva penetrates it. So how might you hear this stirring of tshuva? Just in a passing thought about it. Oh, it's Elul. Oh, what was that about the lights of tshuva? Oh, that didn't feel good. Or conversely, oh, that did feel good, right? Any of that can be a stirring of tshuva. And note that he says it's not just working on the spiritual level, it's happening embodied. It's happening in your flesh itself. And it can gather steam, right, in that gradual way, the Hadragit tshuva. The passing thoughts of tshuva reveal the depths of a person's will, and the strength of the soul is revealed through the fullness of its glory. And according to the greatness of the tshuva will be the greatness of freedom. One needs to deeply internalize faith in tshuva and to trust that even thoughts of tshuva alone also greatly heal a person in the world. I want to suggest that in Rav Kook's imagery of lights of tshuva, it's as if a little spark is being thrown from the depths of your soul or from the divine, however you want to see it, whether it's coming from inside or outside of you, you're getting a flash, a spark. And anytime you catch that, right, that's actually tshuva reaching out to you and inviting you deeper into the process. But even noticing those lights, those sparks, noticing them is tshuva itself. And again, in the next piece, Roman numeral 4 from chapter 5, we're going to find again, tshuva isn't this difficult, burdensome, punishment-filled process. Tshuva is health and pleasure. Tshuva is the most healthy feeling of the soul. A healthy soul and a healthy body necessitates coming to the great joy of tshuva. She feels inside the greatest natural pleasure. The soul is the she there. All forms of ugliness depart from the human soul through the internal joining of the light of tshuva. Tshuva preceded the creation of the world, and therefore it is the foundation of the world. And this is an important teaching. Basically, what it tells us is that before the wound was created, the healing for the wound was created. Before we engaged the sin, which I generally translate in Northern California speak as misalignment, right, with your values, behavior that was not in alignment with the truth of your soul, right? That's what sin is. The corrective for that sin, the healing for that misbehavior was created in the spiritual technology, the spiritual material of the world before you ever acted. And so the healing for the wound is already there and accessible. And it makes sense, right, then, that it feels good. It feels good to engage in Chuva. Maybe not every moment of it. There might be moments of feeling yuck. Doing that thing actually felt gross. It felt gross to be impatient. It felt gross to yell at someone. It felt gross to take what wasn't mine. It felt gross to not give tzedakah when I had that opportunity, or not to be as generous as I wish I had been, right? And that can be the soul letting you know, right? Ugh, that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. But when the soul feels the spark of tshuva, the spark of alignment, it is pleasurable and it brings healing. I'm going to do maybe one more before I take a break and get some questions that you might have. In chapter 6, Roman numeral 5, we see that nothing in the world is as certain as tshuva, right? And this already makes sense from the earlier teaching. If tshuva was created, as the foundation of the world itself, then there's nothing you can rely on more and trust in more than the reality of tshuva. He teaches tshuva is always existing in the heart, even in the moment of sin itself. Tshuva is hidden in the soul, and she sends out her rays afterwards, in the time that the one who regrets calls to tshuva. Nothing in the world is as certain as tshuva. So what we talk about is conscience. Rav Kook is talking about rays of the soul emanating out, reminding us who we actually are. And what I want to maybe highlight here is sometimes when we think of conscience, we might think of it cognitively, as like you have to get there from your brain, right? But sometimes we just feel it in our body. Sometimes we just feel it in our soul or in our emotions. Something hurts. Something feels not right. Something feels misaligned. That feeling of misalignment, according to Rav Kook here, are the very rays of the soul speaking to us and calling us home into our natural dwelling place in goodness, calling us to tshuva, to return to the true dwelling place. Okay, I know that's been a lot. We have a fair amount still to cover, but we'll see what we get to. I want to make sure if there's anyone who's got kind of a burning question, a clarification of what I'm talking about when I use some of these terms, I want to make sure I stop so that we can address that. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. If you'd like to actually ask a question, please do click on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand so that you'll come to the top of the line and we'll see you. And if there aren't any questions, we'll just continue on. Great, wonderful. Let's keep moving. So next, we are at chapter 8. And I put the captions. Oh, okay, yes, Rodaline, please feel free and ask your question. I think you will be taken off mute. But Rodaline, can you put your hand up so that we can find you more quickly? Let's see.
I'm looking.
There we go. Yes.
Oh, you see her hand raised?
Oh, no, I thought that you had found
Oh,
it.
here we go.
Okay, great. Yes, and I see Scott's question about foundational goodness. I'll talk about that while Rodaline's getting unmuted.
Rodaline, I think you can, you should be unmuted now.
Yes, we can hear you.
I just want to know what is that, I don't know if I can say the word, well, Chuva.
Yes.
What exactly is the Chuva?
Yes, so I've been defining Chuva. It's often, I wanted to leave it there because I think that any of the English translations don't fully capture it. But the words that I generally toggle between, what it actually means as return, right? And so it's the soul's return to its own true nature, but it's also this active process of repentance, of seeing where you've done wrong and trying to make it right. Okay. And I see Carolyn also has a question. I'll get to that in a minute. I'm just going to also talk about the foundational goodness. This is an idea you can find in a lot of places, but Rav Kook will talk about it all the time. So if you want to just do some study of Rav Kook, you can find him online. There are sites, if you just Google him, you'll find his works. Many are translated into English and are available online. There are also many books. Also, if anyone's interested in reading about Rav Kook, his thought and his incredible story, this book, Rav Kook, Mystic in a Time of Revolution by Yehuda Mirsky, is a really great read. It's really beautifully written, very accessible. And that's where I pulled the quote about Rembrandt from. Yes, Carolyn.
All right, thank you.
So I have a question. If Teshuva, if we're defining it as repentance and returning, what does Rav Kook say about, well, what is forgiveness? How do we know we're forgiven for what we may have done that was not so great?
Yes, that's beautiful. And we will talk about that. I think what he would say, there are two things that are involved. One is, according to the rabbis, right, according to our rabbinic theology, anything that is between you and God, not things that you do to other people, right, that requires a separate process, but anything that you have done that affects your relationship with God, that is cleared away on Yom Kippur, right? That's accessible. But I think also what we can see, what he's saying is, you actually feel it in your soul, right? When you access it, you can actually, that's part of the healing, is that you can feel it. But I do want to thank you for your question. It gives me opportunity to make sure that I say, for things that you have done to other people, that have impacted other people, and things that other people have done to you, right? Forgiveness is not this easy thing. And it's not this glib thing. I forgive you, you forgive me. It's a process in itself. And, we could do easily a whole series on Judaism and forgiveness. But I think the bullet points I want to say here are, it is not always appropriate to offer forgiveness, right? Or it can be the most healing thing to offer forgiveness. But no one should feel compelled to offer forgiveness to someone who has not engaged in Chuva with them, right? And yet, if it's available to you, then Chuva is freedom, and forgiveness sometimes can be a freedom, but not always. And I think we do a disservice to people when we, suggest that forgiveness is a one-size-fits-all category. It is not. That's my sense of things. Okay. All right. So when we get into chapter 8, we are on the top of page 3. And I just put the beginning part of that. And I saw someone asked about the spelling of Chuva. Whenever we are transliterating from another language, there are many possible spellings. So you'll see it with an H at the end, without an H, with an E, with an apostrophe. And, it's basically based on different people's rules for how they transliterate Hebrew. When the idea to return in full tshuva rises in a person's heart, to mend their actions and feelings, even if it is only in thought, they should not be discouraged by agitation over their many sins when the feelings intensify as one begins to be more conscious. So once you actually spend some time thinking about your behavior, it might be really hard, right? There's a lot of regret there. And there's also just a lot of, sometimes you just feel it in your body. I wish I had done differently, right? That's a natural part of this process. This is the nature of the way. As long as a person is being driven by their least aligned qualities and bad habits, they're not so sensitive to their sins. But sometimes once one feels nothing, and even sees themselves as a righteous person, but once the moral sense is awakened, the light of the soul manifests, and by that light, one's soul is subject to examination, and one can see its stains, right? And so I love that idea of stains, right? It's not that you can't remove the stains. You just have to actually see them first and know what they are before you can begin to heal them. The last piece of this teaching says, and their heart worries inside with great trembling on their lack of wholeness and the depth of their fall. But it is precisely then that one becomes aware that this feeling of worry is the best marker, giving one the good news that there can be full healing in the mending of the soul, and the person can really gather strength from this. He tells us that when it starts to feel bad, that's actually the time when you know you're doing it right. Even though tshuva also is enjoyment and healing, to really get into the gunk of ourselves, once you start feeling like, ugh, that is a sign that you're on the right path. And in the next chapter, we learn that this is all happening personally. But I'm just going to say before I read this next piece, he sees that tshuva happens on all these different levels all at the same time. So you're doing your individual tshuva, but the whole Jewish people, the whole Jewish nation is involved in this communal national tshuva as well. And the tshuva actually happens in family systems and in ancestral lines and lineages. So your tshuva is not only yours alone. You're not this disconnected fragment. How could you be in a world of unity? Your tshuva defies time and space. One's perspective, this is chapter 9, Roman numeral 7 on page 3. One's perspective is enlarged through tshuva. The basic ideal of the good grows to embrace the beginning of the world to the end, to the last generations. And the sweep of this view, because of its length and width, height and depth, goodness and kindness and grace are revealed. Only fractional aspects of existence are disclosed in each particular generation. We only get partial truths in each generation of life. But the complete view is revealed in the house of the generations. When the sweep of the will, inspired by tshuva, endows them all with life and wholeness, abounding with delight. Again, a wider perspective is what he's asking us to see. I don't know if any of you have ever read fiction or nonfiction, these multi-generational sagas, right? Where you can actually see not just one set of characters, right? But how being part of a larger story, whether they know that story or not, affects their lives. Right? This is what we're talking about here. All right, chapter 11, Roman numeral 8. Chuva, in a sense, recognizes that we are eternal and part of the eternal whole. But Chuva also recognizes that we, as human beings, live in bodies, and that the truth of our existence is that we will all die. We will all die. We are all living now, but we will all die. And going deep into tshuva, Rav Kook teaches us to accept our deaths. And in his words, laugh with death. The more deeply rooted tshuva is, the more the fear of death diminishes until it stops altogether. It is replaced by what we see in Proverbs. She laughs at the last day. The spiritual reality of the person's true self, like the spiritual reality of the whole world, becomes explicitly revealed. Death loses its name, and with it the fear and terror it inspires. The individual identity continues to expand and becomes part of the general being. And from there, it is absorbed in the general existence of the whole world. As part of universal existence, it finds its happiness in the divine splendor. This is one that I'm going to suggest takes a lot of work to get to. It's maybe aspirational, right? And then the next chapter is chapter 15, Tshuva as a return to the soul root. And we're going to have two parts with this one. So the first part is the natural regret that burns in the heart from the expression of tshuva comes from the pain felt by the soul when she suffers from remaining static instead of meeting her need to always be ascending toward higher levels. If she is altogether fallen from her status, then she has also lost the sensitivity to feel spiritual pain. At the very least, it has been damaged. But the anguish caused by remaining static pierces to the depths of the soul, and the pain is very great. The spiritual sensitivity of a soul undamaged by decline is alive and active, and the pain of remaining in a static state is against its nature and is the opposite of its reason for being and burns within it like a fire. This can be transformed into the flame of a great love, abounding in spiritual delight. Rav Kook is letting us know here that if we are just content with the same old, our souls are going to call out to us, because the nature of our souls is to be alive and dynamic and changing and growing and noticing and learning. And if we are in a place of stasis, then our soul is not getting to stretch out and continue its growth. And the second part of this teaching, B, when one forgets the essence of one's own soul, when one distracts their mind from attending to the substantive content of their own inner life, everything becomes confused and uncertain. The primary role of Chuva, which at once sheds light on the darkened zone, is for the person to return to themselves, to the root of their soul. Then they will return all at once to God, to the soul of all souls. Then they will progress continually higher and higher in holiness and in purity. This is true whether we consider the individual, the whole people, or the whole of humanity, or whether we consider the mending of all existence, which always becomes damaged when it forgets itself. So Chuva, according to Rav Kook here, is penetrating through your own confusion about who am I? What is the truth of my life? What am I here to do? What is my mission? What is my purpose? And if you ask yourself those questions during this time of Elul, right, and into Tishrei, into the high holidays, into Rosh Hashanah and into Yom Kippur, if you ask yourself, why am I here? What is my work? Who am I? What is my soul nature? And you feel confusion, that's just letting you know there's something in the way separating you between you and the truth of your soul, which should be accessible to you. Right? And so he's inviting you to have some time with those questions and to listen to the sparks or the rays that shine forward. You may not get it all in one big chunk, but what are the clues? And to follow those clues. And if they bring you closer to your soul's truth, then you know they're also bringing you closer to the divine and closer to healing. And that all of this healing is happening. I saw Scott put in the chat, Chuva supports Tikkun Olam. It is Tikkun Olam. When you are in alignment with the truth of your soul, you will naturally and easily do the work of mending the world, because that is what we are here to do. And we will be in alignment with our purpose. And so our very desire will be desire to heal, desire to help, desire to improve, desire to grow. That's what Chuva is telling us. Okay, we're getting close to the end of the material that I brought. So I'm going to just finish it, and then we can have times for questions and conversation. Again, there's an A and B in this part. Full Chuva registers two seemingly contradictory effects on the soul. On the one hand, anxiety and grief over the sins and the evil in oneself. And on the other hand, confidence and satisfaction over the good, since it is impossible for the person not to discover some element of good in themselves when you're looking. even if at times their assessment is confused and they can't find anything good in themselves. The very realization that sin and evil have produced in them anxiety and distress is itself of great merit. One should be happy, confident, full of vitality because of this measure of good. Thus, even while seriously troubled by the emotions of Chuva, one can be filled with the spirit of liveliness, supported by the foundation of action and joy of life and readiness to experience its blessing. And I want to be really clear with a practice suggestion here for those of you who will be going to pray, especially on Yom Kippur, where we do all manner of rounds of confessions that talk about all the bad things that we did. Those confessions are supposed to be specific. So taking the time now to think about what you want to confess out loud, it can be in a whisper, no one else has to hear it, but to God, that is really valuable work to be doing. But alongside that, this teaching of Rav Kook says when we're looking over our year, that might be looking over your journals, looking over your calendar to remember what's happened this year. I want to confess. Also confess the good. Also look for where you made progress, where you didn't do the same old thing, where you took a risk, listening to your soul. Rav Kook is reminding us we confess not only the bad, but also the good. And that strengthens our tshuva because it reminds our soul who we are in our total alignment. And then finally, B, tshuva in thoughts precede tshuva in action. And tshuva in the hidden realm of the will precedes tshuva in thought. Tshuva in the hidden realm of the will is always tshuva out of love, even in the case of those whose tshuva in thought is inspired by fear. So what he's saying here is, whenever you aren't efforting the tshuva to come, whenever it just shows up, whether it was in that tshuva pitomit that we talked about in the first text of like, oh my gosh, sudden illumination, or whether it's just these like kind of faint rays, these sparks, or suggestions or hints of tshuva, anything that is coming to you in that way is coming to you from the divine, which is the ground of love. And he told us way back in the first text I quoted, or in chapter 2, he tells us that a defining feature of that sudden tshuva is that it's mysterious, right? And so that means any part of the tshuva that comes from the hidden realms, meaning we're not analyzing it into being, we're not working it into truth, it's just coming to us. That element of hiddenness, of mystery, is always a hint, I would even say a hug of love. That is God loving us. And so even though it may open up the contradictory feelings of anxiety and difficulty and regret, it's also ultimately, tshuva is a practice of love where we are able to both engage our own sense of love and loving towards the world, but also very clearly, according to Rav Kook, we should be experiencing and feeling God's love for us and using that to strengthen our reflection, our repentance, our return. All right, we have time for a few questions. I see Rav Kook is new to me and I love his teaching. Thank you. I'm so glad. Yes, he really does turn the whole punishment thing on its ear, right? And let us know, no, this whole process isn't about, wearing a hair shirt and banging on our chests alone. It's about seeing the whole truth of who we are, including the good that we have done and the good that we still can do. Yes, David. Let's see if we can unmute David.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Sally says, I always feel slightly stoned when I teach about Rav Kook. He lives there. He lives as a mystic. That's the world.
Okay.
I want to live with him. Yes, David. Yes.
I was told, I study Talmud weekly, and
Yeah.
there's a story about Rav Kook. I don't know if it's true or just apocryphal, that
Yeah.
he wore his tefillin all day long. And I think that indicates to us how he was thinking, an added feature. Thank you so much, Rabbi. For your
Absolutely.
wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I read Rav Kook. It's one of my current daily practices. I'm going through kind of all of Rav Kook's writings little by little. And I can tell you, he was a man of the world. He was raising money for the communities in Palestine. He was figuring out how to bring contemporary teachings about Israel, ancient teachings about Israel into the modern day. He wrote a huge work about how to do Shemitah, the laws of letting your fields rest once the Jews were back in contemporary Israel. Did they have to do that for a whole year? How would they deal with that? He was very much a community organizer and a politician, and he needed to be. He was constantly rooted to this world, but given his druthers, he was writing poetry and he was communing in spirit worlds that were incredibly available to him and were his natural resting place. Yes, I see Irene wants to ask a question.
Hi, I'm from England, so thank you very much for what you said. That book, I taught it for a year in my own dialogue group that I do. I just wanted to say, as you mentioned Shemitah, my friend, Rabbi Yedidia Sinclair, who used to be English in England, in Jerusalem, has written a very accessible translation. You may know it, but your colleagues, this is one of the best, if not the best, session I've ever followed on Rav Kook, even though I've taught it myself, because the extracts you have shown us are really remarkable. I'd like to mention another book, if I may. It's about the chief rabbi of Haifa, who knew Rav Kook, and I knew him. I actually translated his biography. Wow. And it's called, and there's a lot about Rav Kook and the Nazir of Jerusalem and all these things that you're saying. And he actually died a few years ago on the same birth date as Rav Kook originally. But the Nazir was the Rav Kook's greatest friend in Yerushalayim. Yes. So it's called Between War and Peace by Urim Press. Wonderful. And I'm not saying it because I translated it, but because I'm just the translator, but I re-edited. I was friend of the family towards the end of his life in Haifa. So I'm going to recommend you. I love MJL. It's such a good resource. Wonderful. And we need uplifting. Just have the funeral of the monarch, and even if you're a Republican, it's been quite a big drain. It's been quite a big thing after 70 years. And he really liked London at the time. He also was absolutely, because of him, the Balfour Declaration that made the State of Israel went ahead, because he had a go at all the Haredi rabbis that were against it in London when he was rabbi here in that period for a year, because he had to run away. He was in Germany and then he went to Switzerland. It's in that book you mentioned. Wonderful. But he came to England and he really had a go, probably in very broken English, against all those people in the Jewish community that didn't want to have the idea of dual loyalty. And then 250 Jewish groups wrote in to the Times of London. Isn't that amazing? And it's all Rav
It
Kook,
is.
so you're absolutely right. He was
Thank
brilliant.
you.
Actually,
Thank you so
sorry
much
to
for
go
that
on.
suggestion.
Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
And just a note to say, even though he reached out to all of these groups and has had a continuing enormous effect on Jewish life, even into our our of the moment, he was reviled also during his life. He couldn't get, as it is, like, he was too much of this for some and not enough of that. And so we can also appreciate that. So I see we're at our time. I want to hope that our learning together is light and a blessing for each of us to do our own work so that we can bring more blessing to the whole world and be a blessing for all creatures. May we all have a very sweet and healthy new year and a good writing and inscribing Ktiva v'chatima tova. Thank you again for joining me.
Yasher kochech. Yasher kochech.
Bruchim to you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. This was lovely. Wishing you all a Shana Tova and hoping that the learning that we did together today informs your wonderful high holiday season.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.